We're going to have a first-time guest on tonight. First-time guest, Scott McMahan. Scott's coming on tonight with none other than Trevor Loudon. And what is it we're going to talk about? We are going to talk about MAGA being infiltrated. I think that's what's happening. MAGA being infiltrated by a lot of people that are really pushing a narrative that is very friendly to the communists, to the former Soviet Union, now obviously Russia, to the Putin cause, to multipolarity, to the Alexander Dugin cause, the man who is said to be the brain of Putin, Alexander Dugin. We're going to talk about Candace Owens. I guess she's in Moscow right now. I pre-recorded this interview this afternoon with these gentlemen because not everybody wants to have their whole evening taken up. And one of the things we talked about is this guy right here. I was going to say gentleman, but this guy right here. Alex Jones had on this guy, Victor Bout. We're going to talk about it tonight. Alex Jones puts out today, Russia stands as the main obstacle for the past couple of centuries to the globalists. Victor Bout breaks down how God has his hand on Russia and the U.S. to stand against the satanic New World Order's neo-fatal system. Isn't it interesting? So many think that the globalists, that automatically means the Jews. We'll get into that. Here's one. Russian insider Victor Bout responds to Israel takeover at the Pentagon. Folks, these narratives have gained ground. I think this is anti-Semitic. It's certainly tropes that are not accurate. But this anti-Semitism, I think, has gained ground inside the MAGA world, a pro-Russia. Russia's out there defending traditional Christianity. Putin is a lion of Christianity. Some have said in the pro-family cause even. At least I know one guy said that. I've been on video saying it. MAGA's being confused spiritually, politically, geopolitically. And of course, this all benefits our enemies, whether we're talking Russia, China, Iran. Here's another thing. Alex Jones today put this out. Video, Sean Ryan and Megyn Kelly say core MAGA is now pedophile supporting Israeli lobby. The whole MAGA base is being completely confused. How many of you are confused? If you're on social media, you're confused. If you're on social media, you're asking yourself, what is going on? Who do I believe? Who should I believe? You know, what it's doing is causing many people to not trust anybody, and they're just going to back out altogether. Just disengage. Here we go. Look at this. Victor Bout breaks down how the Bolshevik Revolution was carried out by Jews from New York who were shipped in, financed, and used as foot soldiers of the British globalist. Common theme here, folks. And this is being picked up by a lot of people, as I said, in the world of MAGA. Talked about it on radio today in explaining how the New Apostolic Reformation, this Christian nationalism, as many want to use that phrase, and I've said don't use it, you're playing into the left's hand, that you're a nationalist like that of Adolf Hitler or the fascists or the Nazis. Don't use that phrase. Just call yourself a constitutionalist, a Christian defending the constitutional republic, the laws of nature, nature is God. So tonight we're going to deal with a topic that's very important because it shows, I really believe, how enemies outside the U.S., nations outside the U.S. are trying to influence the hearts and minds of Americans, including conservatives and Christians, many who do want our own borders, our own laws, our own currency. But they're being encouraged to blame the wrong people, trust the wrong people. A lot of confusion out there. So I hope you'll tweet, text, email, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social, because how long did I interview those guys for, Logan? An hour and 15 minutes. Oh, almost an hour and 50 minutes. So almost 2 hours. Well, that's, again, why we had to pre-record. Most guys are not interested in giving up their whole night. So I pre-recorded with them. So I hope you'll tweet, text, email, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social right now. Scott McMahan, first-time guest, coming on with regular Trevor Loudon. Now, again, if you appreciate everything we're doing here, we need your support. Please go to worldviewtube.com/sponsors, worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Whether it's Worldview Healthcare, we get your antibiotics and keep them on hand, or your various supplements, worldviewhealthcare.com. Bella Grace, I take it each and every day, as you know. Powerful, powerful elixir with collagen, high-end collagen, peptides cut short so your body can actually absorb it. Over 100 clinical trials on this elixir. So please, check it out and get on board. Okay? Logan, let's get that fixed. I noticed I did not go to the clinical trials. Let's see if we can get that fixed. Every now and then it does pay to click on these buttons, doesn't it? But there are over 100 clinical trials on this. The weight management, the Bella Melts, which stimulates your body's natural GLP-1. So again, worldviewtube.com/sponsors. I drink the Gatatana every day, the phytoplankton. I showed you last night, again, the headline for the man that started drinking this out of his fish tanks when he got a terminal diagnosis. He went on to live another 10 years. I'm watching more social media posts by people that have been able to take what was a terminal diagnosis and then turn themselves around by drinking phytoplankton and other things like Gatatana. I'm not making claims. I'm just telling you what I see. So check it out. Melissa Howse, GPA.com or worldviewtube.com/sponsors. I drink this every night with my dinner. Dolly gets half a scoop on her food every day. Speaking of Dolly, guess what we've put back in place tonight, guys? The Dolly cam. Would you guys like to see a shot of Dolly? There she is, curled up on her MyPillow pet bed. Can we zoom in on her at all, Logan? He's going to says 1 second. Is she asleep? I don't know. I can't see. Maybe I'll zoom in on her face. I can see. But there she is in all her beauty. There you go. He's zooming in. Is she asleep, Logan? I think she is. Yeah, I think she's asleep. But a lot of you are asking for the Dolly cam to come back, and there it is. That's how she sleeps, just so you guys know, next to me every night. Rolled up into a little ball like that next to me. Right at about my chest or stomach level. She likes to be real close. Sometimes she lays on her side and snuggles, but not very much. Sometimes she'll do that for hours on her side. If she's really comfortable and warm, she'll lay on her side. But most of the time, I keep my bedroom pretty cold. So she curls up into a knot like that. She loves to sleep that way. But anyway, I give her Gatatana, half a scoop every day. Ah, there you go. Logan just called her name. Ah, she heard you. You doing good, Dolly? Huh? Oh, big stretch. Oh, yes. Yep. Oh, you're going to look at yourself, are you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, get your Gatatana for your fur baby. You got an itch there, Dolly? Get your I was going to go and see the boys in the control room. No, I'm not going to come see the boys. I'm coming back. You can't. Oh, you're whining. Get your Gatatana for your pet, your fur babies. Okay? There you go. Worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Here she comes. Worldviewtube.com. Come on up. Worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Yep, you're a good girl. Yeah, everybody loves Dolly. Yep. Had to get that Dolly cam going again, didn't we? Yes, we did. Yes, we did. All right, let's see what else we got here. Oh, I can't pet you and move the buttons here. Thank you, sweetheart. All right, let's see here. What are we going back to? Oh, yeah, the glutathione. We do a swish of that every day, right? With the glutathione, with the Numi, the glutathione in it, swishforlife.com. Some studies show it may remove mercury from your brain, helping prevent Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's. MelissaProtein.com. Melissa takes this protein every day because she wants to make sure she's able to maintain her muscle mass. She doesn't want to, shrivel up. Sometimes you get older, you start losing your muscle mass and shriveling up. And so she wants to keep a firmness and a toneness. So she does these protein tablets every day, super amino. Again, she also says it's really helped to flatten her stomach. And it has, to be honest with you. It didn't eat it much, but I have noticed, yes, she's definitely in good shape. And she says she's working out, she's walking, she's lifting some weights, doing her protein. So there you go. MelissaProtein.com, MelissaProtein.com. What else do we got? Worldview Talk, your satellite phones, your solar generators, your bulletproof backpack, and so much more. Your blankets that knock down EMF. Melissa last night put her cell phone in one of the EMF bags. She put her cell phone in one of the EMF bags because she doesn't want that EMF next to her head at night on the nightstand. So she puts it into one of these bags that knocks down the EMF. So there you go. It was one of these right here. Let's see. Cell phone and crypto cold wallet, protective Faraday sleeve. That's what you put it in right there. There you go. All of it, worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com. All right, let's get started. We pre-recorded this today. You're going to love it. Thank you for your support, by the way, worldviewtube.com/sponsors. All right, almost 2 hours. Very important conversation. I hope by now you've gone out there, tweet, text, email, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social. Tell everybody we got a great interview with Scott McMahan and Trevor Loudon. All right, watch this from earlier today. Joining me now is Scott McMahan. He's a first-time guest. We've never had him on the broadcast before, and we're very happy to have him on the program. We are also going to let you know about his Twitter feed where you can follow him and all his research. We're also having on with us tonight Trevor Loudon. Guys, welcome to the broadcast. Scott, welcome. Your first time to be here. Trevor, you're an old alumni. We're glad to have you back here. Thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Brannon, and good to see you, Scott.
It's great to see both of you. Thank you so much for having me, Brannon.
Thank you. I've really been following your Twitter feed and watching what you've been up to. And I wanted to have you on. Today on my radio show at 1 o'clock on 75 Christian stations nationwide and television, I went back to really a presentation from my 2011 book, Religious Trojan Horse. And I began to warn about how at this time, of course, I wasn't warning about this in 2011, but the same groups. In 2011, I was warning about the new religious right, many of the pro-family groups that were working with the new apostolic reformation, false prophets, false apostles. They're into dominionism, reconstructionism, that kind of thing. And I was warning how the globalists wanted to infiltrate the church starting back many years ago. The communists, of course, did that in the 1920s. Former high-ranking black communist Manning Johnson, he talked about it. He flipped against the communists. He wrote a book called Color, Communism, and Common Sense in the 1950s. Sadly, he died from a car crash. But he even talked about how the communists were sending black leaders over to the Soviet Union to be trained and then come back to America in the 1920s. So they wanted to infiltrate mainline churches, black churches. And now they seem to have successfully infiltrated a huge chunk of the mainstream evangelical churches, church denominations, Christian colleges, seminaries, radio networks, TV stations. And now we have MAGA. A percentage of MAGA now is buying into this reconstructionism, dominionism. We're going to create the kingdom of God on earth. We're setting aside really the spiritual for more the material. We're not as concerned about the gospel as we are creating some kind of heaven on earth, if you will. And I'm become increasingly concerned as I see more and more people in the MAGA world and conservative voices pushing a pro-Russia line, pushing an anti-Semitism line. And I'm thinking to myself, this has the handwritings of America's enemies all over it. And I think this is something that's going to resonate with you. And I found out about you through Trevor Loudon. I asked Trevor, I'm like, who is this Scott guy? I think I was seeing your feed and I asked him, he said, oh, yes. And he started speaking very highly of you. So we've really been following you. And I reached out to you today. We talked for the first time. Glad to have you here. So I'm back to warning about that on radio again today of MAGA, percentage of MAGA being carried away by the new apostolic reformation and this ecumenicalism and anti-Zionism. I think in part, if I have to ask a question, is this. does Russia benefit when we have people over here? And it's a rhetorical question. Is Russia benefiting when we have people over here in the so-called pro-family movement claiming that Putin is a lion of Christianity, Putin's against the LGBT community, Putin is not allowing gay parades, Putin is for religious liberty, and we really need to be more like that, and we need to bring that to America, and Putin is standing up for what's right, and we need to be Christian nationalists the way Putin is. That, unfortunately, seems to be what I'm hearing. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we're being inundated with that type of messaging and much more. I mean, there are many different longstanding, and this goes back to the Soviet Union, the narrative objectives of Russia within the United States are to make us believe or cause us to believe that Russia is not a threat, to cause chaos, to cause us to fight with each other, to see the world through this woke friend-enemy paradigm, where there's those of us who are within a certain oppressed class, if you will, which we've seen this on the left, right? That's what woke really is we see this oppressed class they see themselves as oppressed, and that the oppressors are the enemy. And so anyone, and they've expanded that through DEI and critical race theory and LGBTQ theory and feminism, all of that kind of, there were different marketing angles and different branding techniques that brought in this collective umbrella of that saw themselves as friends, and those of us who they view as, especially straight white men, as being the oppressors, or the establishment, the political establishment, as being the oppressors, and then they fight against that. And that Russia was very much involved in that, but they've been infiltrating the right with that as well. And I think that's where a lot of this anti-Semitism is, viewing Israel as the world's oppressor, or even viewing England or the British Jewish bankers as the world oppressor, and instead of this communist threat. And you talked about benefiting Russia. It's not just benefiting Russia, but China. They've been working very closely together to try to weaken the United States, to try to end big part of their ultimate objective is to end the dollar's reserve currency status, so that they can it would be an automatic wealth transfer from the United States to Russia and China, and that they then get to duke it out between themselves and also with Islam to be the world's dominant superpower.
Trevor, can you speak to this, please?
Yeah, I think Scott's essentially right. The Russians who are in Ukraine right now, the hammer and sickle flag is being flown on Russian tanks. Statues to Stalin are going up, and Lenin. Not Christianity. Christian churches are being wiped out in the occupied territories, and this is well documented now. So what the Russians are using on the right, the same techniques they used on the left. They're telling people they're oppressed by the wokeness, which the Russians gave us the wokeness. Originally, the Russians and the Chinese gave us the wokeness. Now these young men are very despondent and very depressed by it, and they give them a way out. Pro-Russian fascism, Christian nationalism, anti-Zionism, hating Israel. These are the ways out, and these are being promoted by people like Candace Owens, who this weekend was in Moscow with Vladimir Putin and Alexander Dugin, one of the main Russian philosophers pushing this kind of garbage. And Tucker Carlson's been over there as well. Nick Fuentes has praised Alexander Dugin. All these anti-Semites on the right, they're all connected to Russia and are all promoting this woke right, leftist, semi-fascist line. And it's doing massive damage to the conservative movement, which I believe is the intention.
And if we go back to Walter Rauschenbusch, the founder of the social gospel movement, a Fabian socialist, right? His right-hand man was Harry the Red Ward. Harry the Red Ward. So you have a Marxist working with a Fabian socialist, for the new people, Fabian socialism. out of London in the 1800s, wanted socialism by revolution, socialism by evolution, not revolution. And Walter Rauschenbusch, a Fabian socialist, is really the one that created this idea of a social gospel and wanted to move the church and Christians away from talking about the spiritual and more toward the material. In fact, he actually bragged that the only way socialism would succeed in America is by religion. If socialism is to succeed, we must use religion. He openly bragged about that. And then he actually said this, talking about Jesus, not as one who would come to save sinners from their sins, but as one who had a social passion for society, end quote. So again, moving from the spiritual, away from the spiritual, more to the material. And, I see this, guys, in the whole kind of this division within the MAGA movement. These new apostolic reformation, false prophets, false apostles, the merging of the ecumenicalism of the Protestants with the Catholics, many of them, again, who are united in their replacement theology that the church has now replaced Israel. I mean, I never hear these guys talk about the gospel, okay? I never hear them talk about the gospel, most of them. I've never heard them give the gospel, the biblical gospel. And so really, it's a form of social gospel in that what we need to do now is concentrate on building this Christian nationalism. So the Christian nationalism, doesn't it, Scott, really lay the foundation for distracting the church from the Great Commission, the preaching of the gospel, applying a biblical worldview to all areas of life? Now we get them all spun up into politics, which is nothing wrong with politics, voting, Christian activism, nothing wrong with that. But you're neutering the church from the power, which is the preaching of the gospel. And now we've got them all pushed toward the idea that God wants us to build the kingdom of God on earth, which a lot of them teach. That the Lord is literally in heaven waiting for us to get our act together to receive the kingdom that we build for him, even though Daniel chapter 2 makes it very clear that what we see is the kingdom of God comes out of heaven like a stone cut out of a mountain, but it says not by human hands. So it's not cut by human hands. It is coming out of heaven, and that is the kingdom of God coming, and it crushes Satan's kingdom. So if these guys knew the Bible, they would know we don't build the kingdom of God. We preach the gospel. We get people converted by faith in Christ alone. But now you have this conglomerate of Christian nationalism in the MAGA movement. And now you've got a culture war going on within the MAGA movement. Those of us who are traditional Bible-believing Christians and understand what the gospel is, who still want to apply a biblical worldview to all areas of life, and these other people that are doing it with the goal of creating, quote, Christian nationalism, which I don't like that phrase. I think it's very dangerous, playing into the hands of the left. And they're trying to establish the kingdom of God on earth, which I really think they're establishing as a false, dominant global church with their ecumenicalism. And that will usher in the kingdom of Antichrist. Revelation 17:1 speaks of that false, global, dominant church. So now you have a culture war going on within MAGA, which is a great way to splinter the movement. Right, Scott?
Absolutely. There is, and a big part of this, you kind of touch on it, is making Christian churches into political organizations. And there is a religion on earth that views the local church essentially as a political organization, and that's Islam. But Jesus taught that, he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. And when he did that, he's describing that there is a separation, an inherent, and there ought to be a separation between the church and the state. The church should not be running the state, and the state should not be running the church. And it's the church that is this little microcosm, that gives us this little glimpse of what heaven can be like as we fellowship with each other as saved sinners, and where we have nothing at all in common within the church except Jesus and what he has done for us that we don't even begin to deserve. And that is the church, as we live that out. And there's three purposes of the church in the New Testament, which is the preaching of the word of God. It's the encouragement and the lifting up of our brothers and sisters in Christ, and evangelism and evangelizing the lost. And those three things are so hard. In fact, it's impossible apart from Christ. And you start throughout history, the history of the church, as soon as you start adding anything into that, whether it's politics or or race or anything else, you end up diluting that and perverting it. And I think that that's part of the intention, is to pervert the church, to distract the church, and to distract Christians from the good work that God has called us to do. And now some of us, he has called into politics. I'm a county commissioner in my county, elected county commissioner. And so if I were to say that being a Christian, being involved in politics is wrong in some way, I'd be the biggest hypocrite. But we are called in all that we do, whatever our calling may be, and all of us as Christians are called to different things in the world. We're called to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit and not the fruit of the flesh. But what I saw, and as a journalist, when I got into looking at this by looking at the Michigan Republican Party and the division within the party that was really being fomented and created by Christina Caramo, who was, she professed to be a Christian nationalist, and it acted and behaved as a mind-controlled cult, a collectivist cult that they believed that they were the only Christians in the party and that everybody else was the establishment, and it viewed the world through the same friend-enemy woke paradigm. And it was a collectivist group versus they call themselves the grassroots. But as soon as they became a collectivist organization that looked to the gatekeepers to tell them what to believe and who to like and who to align themselves with and who to reject, they ceased to become a grassroots. They became a collectivist organization. And so I saw this that was exhibiting the fruit of the flesh. They were absolutely hateful towards anyone who was not a part of their group. And that ultimately was the reason why Christina Caramo was removed from being the chair of the Michigan State Republican Party. But that's a great example of exactly what you're talking about, Brennan, where this division through the church and being applied to politics, it caused what they were, and she was removed right in February, March of 2024, which, as you know, I mean, this was a critical election season. The state party was deep in debt without any funds. There were two state parties for 2 months in this critical election year. And it really led me to believe that the purpose of this was to divide and destroy the Republican Party, which I do believe is our best hope at political solution to our political problems. We've got all kinds of problems that aren't political, but the Republican Party uniquely stands for individuality, freedom, and the preservation of our constitutional republic. And so without a Republican Party, we become really a one-party communist state, which is the ultimate objective of going back to Russia and China and this multipolar objective that they're working towards.
So that's very interesting that you and I are in 100% agreement that they're trying to move the church off its main goal and focus. And of course, that doesn't mean, again, we don't get involved in Christian activism or politics or whatever, the affairs of the city. That's all the word politics means, affairs of the city. And of course, I want to apply a biblical worldview to all the issues from local, state, federal, national, international. But as you state, if the church gets moved off the goal of what it's supposed to do as a New Testament church, then guess what? All of a sudden, we don't care about false teachers. We don't care about those who are the wolves coming in to eat the sheep. And they are, whether I think that's Cindy Jacobs, who thinks she's reversing hysterectomies over the television, whether I think that's Paula White. These people are false teachers. I can clearly believe from the Bible and knowing what the Bible says and what they say. The Bible says in Acts to beware of those people who have risen, particularly it says men, but beware of those men who have risen from within to draw away the disciples after themselves, right? And they're changing the direction and purpose of the church by drawing away the disciples after them, after their goals, after their objectives. So isn't it interesting? Then you bring in Christian nationalism and you convince the church this is your new main mission, And by the way, don't worry about all the false teachers because we're united in a good common cause and ecumenicalism requires it. And pretty soon the church has been completely infiltrated, moved off the mark, and has been neutered. Now, again, I think you can be involved in what Francis Schaeffer called being a co-belligerent, meaning I'm involved in issues with people who I do not agree with theologically, but I keep it on the issue. I don't get involved in spiritual enterprises, interfaith stuff, interfaith dialogue. I don't do any of that. I just keep it on the issue of whether it's fighting active euthanasia, border, forced vaccines, not a problem. But to this Christian nationalism, by its very name, puts Christian in there and now wants us all to have a big kumbaya of interfaith dialogue and ecumenicalism, which I think is playing right into building the false dominant church of Revelation chapter 17, verse 1, that ends up being used by the Antichrist. Now, I go back to Harry Ward, the Federal Council of Churches. And Harry Ward, a Marxist working with Walter Rauschenbusch, the social justice guy. Here's what he said their goal was. A changed attitude on the part of many church members concerning the purpose and function both of the church and Christianity, end quote. Well, there you go. He told us point blank what his goal was. And that's my concern in part with Christian nationalism. But I think it's also, Trevor, causing many people to believe that somehow the problem is now Israel and its other countries, and Russia is a great model for us to follow because he's against gay parades, LGBTQ agenda. He's for his strong Russian Orthodox churches. And isn't it interesting that some of these folks seem to have ties back to Russia or groups that are very pro-Russia, including maybe reportedly some of their funding, which we won't have to name names, but we'll get Scott to mention that. Go ahead, Trevor.
Well, look, the Russians, you got into the churches in the 20s and moved them to the left and split many of the mainstream churches, basically neutralized the mainstream churches. Then the evangelical movement got a lot stronger. And the evangelical movement was the backbone of the Reagan Revolution and the anti-communism of the 80s and that sort of thing. So the new Russia is now working on the right. It's now working to split the evangelical movement, to turn them against Israel. It's working to break them away from the Republican Party. It's working to divide the Republican Party into pro-Russia, anti-Russia, pro-Israel, anti-Israel lines, etc. But it's the same people doing this. We saw from the mid-90s onwards, the Russians were inviting American Christians to family conferences in Hungary and Georgia and, Georgia, Europe, not Georgia, Southern America, for family value conferences, telling them all that Putin was a lion of Christianity. He's going to save them from George Soros and the Muslim hordes. Where Putin is behind George Soros. Putin is behind the Muslim hordes. It's Putin's KGB that gave us the radical LGBTQ movement. And now they've gave us all the wokeness. Now they're harvesting the reaction to the wokeness. To me, I'm a straight up constitutional conservative. I believe in the Reagan vision. You stand against communism, you stand for Christianity, you stand for Israel, you support our allies, you want a small government, a good education system, and a strong national defense. It was very easy to be a conservative in the 80s because you knew where you stood. They were the basic paradigms for most of us. Today, the conservative movement, the GOP, is split in many, many ways. And all of it goes back to Russia. As I said before, Tucker Carlson is a splitter. Steve Bannon has done a lot to split the movement along those lines. Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, every single one of them is connected to Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher who is basically Putin's brain, and has openly called for civil war in the United States and the destruction of the West, and specifically the destruction of Protestant Christianity, which is why they are these people are really cultivating the Catholics, cultivating the Orthodox, because they believe the Reformation should never have happened, and we should never have had the American Revolution, and we'll all be better off under Russian domination. You know, I've seen people saying, I saw a Canadian write the other day, I can't wait till the Russians invade Canada. I'll welcome them as liberators. Can you believe that? But this is a sentiment that has been fostered by QAnon, coming through the Ron Paul movement, coming through RT, coming through all of these Russian influence operations. And I think Scott, Scott's done great work on this to show this. But it's becoming very clear now. When Candace Owens went to St. Petersburg on the weekend, that was the last domino for me, because every other one of these people has connections to Russia. But Candace didn't. She was just echoing their propaganda. But here you go. She's going to Russia for what she called her own religious experience. No, she was going to a conference to speak alongside Alexander Dugin and Vladimir Putin for an organization that's all about multipolarity, which is a Russian scam, basically, for reducing America's role in the world to the point that America can be destroyed. So she's working with America's enemies over the weekend, and all these poor deluded people think she's just wonderful. She's a truth teller. No, she's an absolute liar, a liar in the service of Russia. And now that's becoming more and more apparent.
And, Trevor and Scott, we know people that are, maybe watching now. There it goes again. A Russian behind every bush, and Russia just wants to be their own country. They don't want to go into the New World Order and globalism. They just want to be left alone. And Trevor is making them out to be something they're not. Like they want a revived Russian empire, if you will. But I hear this from people, not many, but I hear this from a few. You have to hear this from a few too, right? Right, Trevor?
Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah, I certainly hear it all the time. Oh, Loudon, the Cold War is over. Well, nobody ever told the KGB that. Russian foreign policy, they're still working with the same people they worked with in the Cold War. They're still working with the Cubans and the North Koreans and the Venezuelans and the Nicaraguans and the Chinese. And their foreign policy hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is they've already controlled the American left. They control the American Democratic Party to a large degree. Now they have to get inside that Reagan coalition and co-opt it and pervert it and weaken it, because that's the last opposition to Russian and Chinese domination of the world, effectively.
Well, and if you get also a bunch of people in the Christian nationalist movement, which again, that's a very dangerous thing. You're playing into their hand, because as I say to many of them, I said, why do you want to use that? Why don't you just call yourself a constitutionalist? You're interested in a constitutional republic, because nationalism under Hitler, that's what he wanted. But it was the state was of primary importance. Now, I know you probably are not for that. You're not a socialist. You're not a fascist. You're not for that. But you use that term and you confuse people, and you're playing right into the hand of the left that want to paint you as a fascist, as a Nazi. So stop using it. But they won't. So that tells me if they won't stop using it, Scott, that tells me they're doing it on purpose. So whose bidding are they doing? If they keep calling themselves Christian nationalists, getting others to do it, wearing that badge with pride, and you've been told how this is a setup, that the left wants you to use that term so they can see, they even admit they're Christian nationalists who want a theocratic government. They want to use religion to bring in their theocracy, the same way Hitler dissolved the church denominations and had them all unite under the Reich bishop handpicked by Adolf Hitler, Mueller, that was his name. It's the same thing. And you're like, they're all doing it. Look at it. It's repeating itself. Well, I try to explain these things to them. Do you see the template? And now you're falling into it by calling yourself a Christian nationalist. Stop doing that. No, they won't. So that tells me they either are really, really not real bright, or they actually are being put out here to do this on purpose. What do you believe about that? And do you have any of your work? Are you seeing any of these groups in America, denominations, church groups, pro-family groups, any of these MAGA groups or affiliate groups, 501c3 groups, whatever you want to call these different splinter groups. The left has their non-government organizations, we have them too on the right. Are any of them connected back to Russia or Putin's friends, or are any of them getting paid money that you're able to track through public filings or anything?
Well, it's difficult. They rely heavily on both for-profit companies and nonprofits, and then within nonprofits, there's 501c3s where we can track some of the inflows and outflows, but not all. And then the 501c4s where we have they're completely opaque. And that, by the way, is something that I would absolutely love to see President Trump tackle during this term, is bringing some transparency to the 501c4 structure. I think it would be a phenomenal thing as far as dissolving some of this web of non-NGO, non-governmental organizations. And just like the left, we've seen this with the Soros organization and all of these different organizations that all kind of transfer money one to another, and how USAID was doing that. And to some extent, that perhaps some of that USAID money has also flown through to some of these so-called conservative organizations. But there are a lot of organizations. One example is Ziklag, which we talked about when we were speaking earlier, Brannon, and the official name of the organization is Transform USA Inc. It's been reported on that it's a network of about 125 high net worth families, including about 8 billionaires. I believe there might be somewhere between 6 and 10 billionaires, and some that are close. And they came together around the Gateway Church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is Robert Morris's church. And Robert Morris is close friends with Lance Wallnau, who you've written about quite a bit, as one of the fathers of the modern Seven Mountains Mandate Dominionist kind of ecumenical movement. This idea that Christians have a calling from God to take over government, and that we need to make this into a Christian nation. And I don't shy away from the Christian nationalist term, because I think it's actually pretty accurate. It's just another form of ethno-nationalism.
But you don't
like
call yourself
nationalism.
a Christian nationalist.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But those that call themselves Christian nationalists and try to wear this as a badge of honor, or even distort the actual definition of it by saying, hey, if you're a Christian and you're a nationalist as opposed to a globalist, you're not a globalist, so you're a nationalist, then you put those together and bam, you're a Christian nationalist. That is a complete perversion of what it really is. And I believe that's a deliberate campaign to normalize that term, Christian nationalism, so that they can then further expand their cohort and their following, and this whole effort to infiltrate, just as you've written about and talked about quite a bit, infiltrate and co-opt the American church especially. And it's very dangerous, and because it's not what God calls us to as a church.
And do you think there's funding coming from pro-Russian groups, pro-Iran groups, pro-Chinese groups? Where is this coming from, if anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, they're experts at concealing foreign money flows, and so it's not like you can open up a register and say, oh, look, here's X billion dollars that came from Russia or China to this organization. Then but we do see that there are people who are both aligned with Russian and Chinese interests, and who have traveled extensively to Russia and China, who are involved in these various organizations. And then there are also, I think, there are well-intentioned people in Ziklag, for example, that do have good intentions. But it's this. There are also people who know exactly what they've worked to create there, and it's this coming together of money, of this. Lance Wallnau is directly involved with Ziklag, of the ideology, and of military intelligence, which is really a key aspect of it. And it was I was told that organization was formed out of ASOG, Allied Special Operations Group, which is a team of so-called cyber experts that was working on election fraud and did all kinds of investigations that ended up leading nowhere after the 2020 election. But they're all military intelligence, former military intelligence people, and there are a lot of former military intelligence people who also end up getting tied up with Russia and China, and whether it's because of the money or other sorts of manipulative tactics that they may have, but there's the alignment, the objectives, and the outcomes all do point to, this really looks, walks, and smells like a Russian-Chinese operation.
Isn't that interesting? And now you talk about these guys, we won't name them, but some guys that have a lot of money, and they may have very good intentions. And I've gone to some of these things. I've gone to some of these events over the years where some of these people were what's called the doers and the donors, right? The doers who are out there doing it in the pro-family movement and the conservative grassroots movement, and then the donors. And a lot of these guys are multi-millionaires. Some of them are multi-generational wealthy families, right? And they fund a lot of people and movements and conservative groups on the right. But this is a perfect example to me of when the church gets away from teaching the Bible in context, that this is the goal of the New Testament church from the scriptures. Go ye therefore into the world and make disciples, right? Preaching and baptizing men in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then teaching them all the things that I've taught you. So the Lord's commending his disciples to become the apostles. Here's the Great Commission. Here's what I want you to do. Make disciples. So you have to evangelize them and then train them after they're believers, right? And yet we start now thinking, our goal is to get people saved, then to train them into our objective. And our objective is to build a Christian nation, Christian governments, and Christian governments around the world so that Christ can return. And if we don't do this, we keep delaying the return of the Lord. And they're being taught this because people are totally taking the scripture out of context. Now, pretty soon, these well-intended, very wealthy people who don't know the Bible, haven't been taught the Bible in context, now think they're doing God's work by funding all these groups that are actually doing exactly the opposite of what they're called to do. In fact, through their ecumenicalism, their politicalism, their pragmatism, whatever, what they're actually doing is building the false dominant church, because to accomplish this goal, we have to work with everybody. So we're going to work with the Catholics, the Protestants, the Mormons, all across the board. And pretty soon, the mission of the church is watered down, Satan wins. And now, wait a minute, we got replacement theology coming in, which is anti-Israel, anti-Jew, breeds anti-Semitism. Satan wins again. So every time you turn around, you're like, wait a minute, Satan is winning. This is clearly an Ephesians 6 spiritual battle thing. And of course, many of our enemies, national enemies, I think many of them are inspired by, satanic influences. So all the way around, it's neutering the church, watering the church down, getting the church off its mission, and yet getting the church to embrace and endorse things that other Christians will then embrace and endorse, thinking it's Christianity. And you got a lot of very wealthy business people, some of whom I know are very wealthy, but they don't know squat about the Bible. And when I talk to them about the Bible, they don't know anything about the Bible. They just know ABC. That's about it. The ABCs of Christianity. And they don't know anything else. Am I wrong, Scott?
No, absolutely. And I think that
absolutely I'm wrong, or absolutely I'm not wrong.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Thank you for insisting on me being clear. You are absolutely correct. It's their pitch is, I think, really worth looking at. How is it that they convince people to get into this? On the fringes is this element of, well, if you're a Christian and a nationalist, then boom, you're a Christian nationalist. But it's more than that. I think, they play on the frustrations that many of us have as believers and as we look at our culture and the political situation in this country. And they say that, and their pitch to pastors is, well, God, and they actually go directly to pastors with this message, which is it's a tragic statement about our the state of our seminaries, that there are trained pastors that actually fall for this, and they absolutely do, but they convince pastors that they have a calling to save the world, not just their congregation, not just sinners, but to save the country and to save the world, and that we need to, and it plays a lot on the pro-life movement. And because, many of us have gotten very politically active with the pro-life movement. And so we have to do that. It's life, it's the schools, taking back our schools. It's and this kind of relates to Q and the whole idea that the satanic pedophiles are the problem. And so we got to take care of it, and we got to do something about these satanic pedophiles, and then the corrupt courts and local government. And so it's playing on all of those ideas, many of which are largely fabricated or at least exaggerated. Although there's a shred of truth in all of it, but they take that and that the frustrations that we have with the moral degradation in society, say, well, you have to, as a Christian, God's calling you to do something. There's partial truth, and they're masters at using partial truth to lead us to false conclusions and lead us into action and to beliefs that ultimately will cause our demise. And that's why I think it's so important that we hold fast to the word, that we recognize, okay, churches are not to be political organizations. We're called as individuals, and the church is there to God gives us through his word a very clear mandate for churches and how they are to operate. And we should hold to that. And we should insist that our churches hold to that. And as soon as you start making compromises, whether, and there's so many different compromises that you can make with scripture, but as soon as you start making them, it's a slippery slope, and we fall away. And that's part of the amazing thing about the Bible is it's given to us for our good, and it gives us all that we need for life and godliness, right? So we need to hold fast to it. And Christian nationalism at its core, the problem with Christian nationalism, when you understand it, is it's not Christian, and it's certainly not constitutional. Because the whole idea of a theocracy is completely, in every way, opposed by our Constitution, and especially the First Amendment. So, it's messy. It's this. They like to live in this messy gray world, and play on partial truths in order to deceive us.
Look at this. This is a book which kind of got into it back in 1958. Collectivism in the Church by Edgar Bundy, 1958. And the subtitle of the book, he was warning about the National and Federal Council of Churches started by Walter Rauschenbusch, the Fabian socialist, and his buddy Harry F. Ward, the Marxist. 1958, here's what he warned about, Edgar Bundy. Quote, "We have seen how Dr. Walter Rauschenbusch and the leaders of the social action movements in the churches decided to do away with Christian individualism and turn to outright collectivism, using the church as their instrument. Religion was only a means toward achieving socialism. And like all other false prophets who infiltrated religion through the centuries, Rauschenbusch used a front or disguise. This disguise, as we have seen, was the kingdom of God," end quote. Okay, so you say, well, wait a minute, Brannon, that's talking about infiltrating the left. Yes. He goes on to say, listen, quote, "The kingdom was not pictured as a spiritual society in which men and women had to be born as individuals through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as Savior, but as a collectivist society which would be brought about by eradication of poverty, redistribution of wealth, and economic justice," end quote. Look at this, guys, because what they've done, let's keep on this quote for a minute. What they've done is they took the idea of, hey, you want to build the kingdom of God on earth? Well, then you need to help us make everybody the same and fix their problems and create the environment of economic justice. You know what? They've done this and sold it to the right. They've sold it to the right. You want the kingdom of God to come on earth? We have to take dominion. We have to reconstruct society. We have to get control of all the power centers. And now, instead of spending your time bringing people to a personal relationship with Christ, Now we've got to get organized politically in order to be the biggest coalition we can to eradicate socialism and all these other evils. So the one side is mobilizing for socialism. The other side is mobilizing for eradicating socialism. But they're both being distracted by the same thing and by the same players. You notice the nuance, Trevor? Well, how they pitch it to the left,
I get
how they
exactly what
pitch
you're
it to the
saying,
right.
Brannon.
Isn't that interesting?
But it's like the left gave us wokeism, and now they're mobilizing the right against wokeism and telling us we've got to use the same tactics of the left. This is why James Lindsay, my friend, calls it the woke right, because they're perfectly willing to use left-wing methods to achieve what they call right-wing ends. But, I'm straight in the middle. I'm a constitutional guy. You don't fight socialism by bringing in fascism. You don't need to do that. You apply the Constitution. We have a Bible and we have a Constitution to give us guidance. But, back to the point you were talking about before, Brannon, like when Charlie Kirk was killed, for instance, the meme came out that it was done by Mossad. The Israelis killed Charlie Kirk. Where'd that come from? Grey Zone, a pro-Russian website. Straight away, pro-Russian website, picked up by Candace Owens, picked up by a whole bunch of other people. But it's not so much the Russian money that comes in, because the Russians don't have a lot of money, really, compared to the Chinese. It is the Russian ideas that are pumped through RT and QAnon and the Ron Paul movement and the Lyndon LaRouche movement and the so-called alt-right, the Richard Spencers of the world, the Matt Heimbachs, all of the David Dukes. All of these people are pumping this Russian propaganda, which has been picked up by large chunks of our side now. So we don't want to fall into the trap of opposing wokeness by becoming fascists, but we also don't want to fall in the trap of hating other Americans when most of the stuff that's poisoning us is coming from the Russians.
And Trevor, that's where we see some people on social media. I've even interviewed some people here who said some things that made me very uncomfortable about people on the left, like, we're going to target you, we're going to eliminate you. I don't know if those were the exact words, but at the time it was something being said that made me, I even at times I'd say, hey, the views and opinions here are not mine, and laugh about it because I didn't know what else to do but to set myself away from that. But some comments are being made by some, and also in print on X, that sound like people on the right, some of these so-called Christian nationalists or whatever, where they're saying things about people on the right. I'm like, wait a minute. That sounds like the tactics of Antifa. That sounds like the tactics of Black Lives Matter. We're law and order people. We don't threaten people or target them or their home or talk about them in a way that some nut job could read it and think, it's my duty to go and somehow do physical harm to somebody. We don't talk like that. Not only as conservatives, but as Christians, we don't talk like that. Yet I see some of the people in these movements saying things to me. I'm like, wait a minute. How is that not a terroristic threat or very close on the line to one, Trevor?
Yeah. And that's deliberate. We have threats, internal and external, in this country. Back in the 50s, we had the House Un-American Activities Committee. People who were working for the Soviets, betraying the country, were called up to testify before Congress. Some of them were indicted and prosecuted. They had lawyers, they had representation, they were given fair trials, and some of them were convicted and prosecuted and jailed, as they should have been. That's the way to deal with these people, not become thugs. This is what was happening in Germany in the 30s. You had the communists rampaging through the streets, and the ordinary people were freaking out. So then the fascists came along and started beating up the communists. So people joined the fascists because at least they were dealing with the communists. If the government of the day had dealt with the communists legally and firmly, as they should have, as foreign agents breaking laws, the fascists would have not got any traction. So we have a frame, we have a constitutional framework for dealing with enemy agents operating in our country. But those laws are not used or neglected, which then gets people very disgusted and despondent, and they are open to seduction by the sort of fascist type element.
But when you talk about, we have people on the so-called right talking in a way that sounds very inappropriate about people on the left, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, this is what we were upset about during the Biden years, where people on the left were talking about us on the right. Now, the right, some of them are talking about the people on the left in a way that's dehumanizing them and could even be calling for targeting them or eliminating them or 2 a.m. raids. And I'm like, wait a minute. This narrative seems to be the Hegelian dialectic, thesis and antithesis, idea, opposite idea, get them to fight. And who wants a civil war in the country? I don't, but I think Russia does.
The Russians do.
Yeah.
Alexander Dugin has openly called for it on many occasions.
And China does.
Tucker Carlson, or China does. Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, they're all protégés of Dugin. And Dugin calls for civil war in America.
And just for the reminder of people who might be new, Alexander Dugin is a Russian who's oftentimes called Putin's brain, correct, Trevor?
Yes.
Okay.
And Candace Owens was in St. Petersburg this weekend talking at a conference alongside him.
You want to comment on this before I play a clip? Because there's some breaking news here that I think you guys are going to be shocked by, or maybe you won't be shocked by. But you want to comment on this talk and this language on the so-called right that I'm referring to, Scott?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's we've seen this. They've been talking about. I'm trying to do this without naming names, but there have been individuals who, especially over the last few years, who have been calling for retribution and calling for, they use the word accountability as a nebulous, because it's a very nebulous term to shift the goalposts, because what they call accountability continues to change in definition. And so, like right now, there was one really major influencer who just said that, we need accountability. We need 2 a.m. raids, just like what was done to people like Roger Stone. And so we need 2 a.m. raids against and they're not even saying for who. They're not saying for what crimes. They're not saying what evidence might lead a jury to actually convict those people. But it's this bloodlust for a general accountability, and they use that. And this really started with the very first Q post, which said that Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested the very next week, and that she was going to be tried by military tribunal and hanged from gallows. And this was in 2017. And so there's this continuous demand that all the bad guys, first all the bad guys are on the left. Because we don't want to look at those that might be infiltrating our side, but all the bad guys on the left, and they all need to be arrested. And if they're not all arrested, every single one of them, then Trump's not doing his job, and he's a failure, and there's no hope at all for society. And so, our hope, that the thing is that's deeply unconstitutional, because our what's unique about our justice system and all of human history is that it favors the accused. And so there are, and many of our founding fathers said something along the lines of, it's better to have, many guilty go free than one innocent man be punished for something that he didn't actually do. And so, and that's a great thing. That's what we should want, that from our justice system to favor us in the event that we are wrongfully accused. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's not what they want. They want us to have this nihilistic view towards our judicial system, towards our election system. They want us to lose all hope in our own government, so that we end up railing against it.
And of course, it's not hard.
I think that's a point. The mass killers, the people in San Diego recently, there's a pro-Russian guys, you see. And they believe
from their own manifestos,
by the way.
From their own manifestos, right? From their own manifestos.
They don't say it. They believe there's no hope for our society. We've got to tear it all down. We've got to kill all our enemies. This is what they say. And so this is a false dichotomy here. No, we don't. We have to follow the law and follow the Constitution and restore our country that way. but that takes discipline and courage.
Well, and I look at, if someone had told me 15, 20 years ago, you'd be interviewing Alan Dershowitz multiple times, and you and Alan Dershowitz would be finding yourselves in agreement on major civil rights issues, I would have thought, I don't think there's much Alan Dershowitz and I are going to agree on. And yet there I am interviewing Alan Dershowitz. Now, do we still disagree on some major things? Yeah. But Alan is for civil liberties. He's for free speech. He is Jewish. He is against anti-Semitism. He understands the dangers of Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood. It doesn't mean, again, that Alan agrees with everything I believe in every area, or I agree with him on every area. But Alan, the point I'm making is the people on the right dehumanize the left. The people on the left sometimes dehumanize us, obviously, on the right. And yet, if you don't let that happen and you actually have dinner with someone or visit with them, you find out, no, we don't agree on this, this, and this. But I tell you what, we sure do agree on freedom of religion for both Christian Protestants and Jews. We agree that we should be fighting anti-Semitism. We agree that people like me who are Christian Zionists, who believe in what God's plan is for the Jewish people, should not be persecuted or harassed or hunted down. Right. I mean, you start going down the list and you're like, these are pretty important issues that have to do with the Constitution. But if you don't ever get to visit with each other, and that doesn't mean, again, we have to have some kind of theological, spiritual kumbaya. We can just agree on these issues. But if you don't ever talk with someone like Alan, or he never talks to someone like me, then you would just assume that everybody on the right must be like this. Well, he comes out pretty soon and finds out, hey, and it says on my show, you Christian evangelicals are some of our biggest supporters. We really appreciate you, right? And he's thanked me on the air many times. Well, what I'm trying to say is there may be some people on the left I don't agree with. But if they are having their home raided for unconstitutional reasons and they're being mistreated, I want to speak up for them because A, that's wrong, but B, that can happen to me too. That's a double-edged sword. And I think that's where we're going. That whoever's in power, this is now justified to do it to the left. It's justified to do it to the right. And yet I think there's a lot of Americans in the middle saying, can we not just take it case by case and see what's the charge here and then put it through the legal system, Scott, as you're saying? Because I think otherwise what we're at here is just simply tooth and claw,
Yeah, try.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, they want us to see each other as enemies. And the they here is those that want our destruction. And, so we're looking at the BRICS countries, Russia, China, Iran, these countries that openly and declare that they want the end of America and the destruction of America. They want us to fight with each other. And it's very clear if you look at history, it's very clear if you look at them honestly and when what they're doing, what their objectives are, how much money they invest into buying access to our own hearts and minds. And that's really what, Russia doesn't have a lot of money, but where they put it is an investment into accessing our hearts and minds. That's why they're paying for Candace Owens to go out to St. Petersburg right now, because she's got millions of followers. She has 6 million followers on X. That's access to American hearts and minds. And she's already in that direction of creating major division and inciting hatred towards all kinds of groups of people within this country.
Well, I quote, and I interviewed him. I didn't know I interviewed him until I went through some of our archives. But I interviewed the highest ranking general to ever defect from the Soviet Union, Lunev. And he says that the Soviet Union, the communists, for the Vietnam War, they spent $1 billion infiltrating America to make sure we lost wars.
Yeah, they spent more money on the U.S. peace movement than they did supporting the Viet Cong. The Vietnam War was lost on the streets of America and in the U.S. Congress by all these communist congressmen. But as you said before, Scott, the first QAnon post was basically saying America is hope, we got to be hanging people. Well, QAnon was one of the main conduits of Russian propaganda in the country. That was one of the main conduits of anti-Semitism. There's Khazarian mafia, the Rothschilds, the royal family, all of this which is just recycled Tsarist, then Nazi propaganda, which is now quite commonplace in our circles. But that was another example of how the Russians, for the investment of a few hundred staffers writing this stuff, a few people sitting in rooms in St. Petersburg and Moscow, going on the internet, pumping this stuff out, influencing Americans, they could do that for the price of one nuke. They could pay all those guys to influence American public opinion for the price of building a nuke each year. So what do you think they're going to do? The Russians are experts at propaganda. That's all they've ever done to keep their revolution going.
Mm-hmm.
They've never had a good argument to stand on. They've just had propaganda, and stupid people, ungrounded people fall for it.
This is in my book, Marxianity. During the Vietnam War, another information operation effectively turned the hearts of Americans against fighting the communists and winning the war in Vietnam. Stanislav Lunev, a former colonel in Soviet military intelligence, defected to the United States in 1992 and wrote a book called Through the Eyes of the Enemy, which exposed the deceptions that had been foisted on American citizens. He explained the basic communist strategy against the U.S. war in Vietnam. Quote, "What would be a great surprise to the American people is that the GRU and the KGB had a larger budget for anti-war propaganda in the United States than it did for economic and military support for the Vietnamese. The anti-war propaganda cost the GRU more than $1 billion, but as history shows, it was a hugely successful campaign and well worth the cost. The anti-war sentiment created an incredible momentum that greatly weakened the U.S. military," end quote. And this is going on, of course, on the side of the Islamists, as well as on the side of the Marxists. In fact, over at worldviewreport.com today, our daily aggregated news site, I have a article over there that's claiming that Qatar has spent, we were at like $40 billion, but Qatar spends over, what is that, $65 million to manipulate U.S. education? I guess that's the number. 65 million, yeah. And this is according to the Jerusalem Post. But we've heard about them spending billions. So it's the red-green axis. I notice a lot of these guys in the MAGA world that are, quote, Christian nationalist. I don't hear a lot of them having too much to say. Some of them do, but a lot of them aren't saying that much about Islam. Why are they not talking a lot about Islam, Scott?
Because Qatar is funding some of them.
Say that again? Say that again?
Because Qatar is funding some of them. That's why.
Let me show you something here, guys. This is, I guess what went on with Alex Newman. Alex Jones. Sorry, Alex Jones. Sorry, Alex Newman. I meant to say Alex Jones. This is what went on with Alex Jones today. Logan, do you have some of this? Okay. The Russian insider Victor Bout responds to Israel takeover at the Pentagon. Who is Victor Bout? Can anyone tell me? Here's another one.
He's a professed communist and a former Russian arms dealer who was sending Russian arms to terrorist groups around the world, anti-American groups, was arrested in Thailand and put in jail, then exchanged for some Russian spies, I think under the Obama administration. Well, might have been under Biden, I'm not quite sure.
Logan, can we get some footage of him? Do we have any footage of him coming off the plane and being brought back home, and so we can find out what year that was? So you're saying... What, Logan?
Sorry, wrong.
He was exchanged for the basketball player? The female basketball player.
Oh, right. Okay.
Pretty great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Well,
Good
it was
catch,
even
Logan.
worse. What is even spies? It was a basketball player.
Yeah.
Dope smoking basketball player.
Okay.
But that's the thing. He is now on Alex Jones. Alex Jones has been one of the major conduits of Russian propaganda for years. Now he's got a self-proclaimed communist, a Russian arms dealer to terrorists on his show,
and you can back all
telling
those
us
claims
how
up.
bad Israel is,
You can back all
how that
those claims
Israel's
up.
taken over our military.
And you can back all those claims up you just said.
Yeah, but this is common knowledge. You can get that off Wikipedia. This is not, we know he was a Russian arms dealer. He was giving arms to the FARC and Hamas and all these different groups around the world. The US government was after him for years, and they finally trapped him in Thailand. They scammed him, and they induced him to come to Thailand and arrested him. He went to jail for life, supposedly, and he got out in exchange for a basketball player. But now the point is, Alex Jones is now platforming him to millions of Americans, where he is telling us that Israel has taken over the Pentagon and that we're getting into wars because of Israel. That is a classic example of a Russian anti-Israel, anti-Jewish propaganda campaign.
So where is he now?
Promoted by Alex Jones.
Where does he live now?
Russia, Moscow. I think he might be even a Russian parliamentarian now.
Ooh. All right. You have a clip or two? This is from today, right, Logan? You got a clip or two? All right, let's roll it.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. I think Israel's going to stage another 9/11.
Well, I also think so, because they're going to push to the extreme limits. And now it's up to Trump. You need not only, call him and scold him in this telephone call, but do some, real show to Israelis, hey, you do this, this will be cost to you, because this is really sabotaging, basically, not only, I would say his plans of the peacemaking with Iran, but the economic damage, as I said, this is what affecting America more and more.
So the Jews are going to carry out,
American,
you notice the word there? It was another 9/11. That was the word, wasn't it?
So now, see, that's one of the Russian memes. The Jews did 9/11. That's been going around for years. That's a Russian propaganda. The Jews did 9/11. It was Muslims, many of whom were trained by the Iranians and the Russians, who did 9/11. And ever since I've been promoting this myth, the Jews did it. Now he's saying, and Alex Jones is accepting it uncritically, because he's been promoting this, the Jews did 9/11. We all know this. Now they're planning to do another one. Well, what is that if that's not completely false, Russia, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel propaganda done in collusion with a major Russian agent?
Logan, do we have another clip?
It's actually even worse than that, because Alex Jones, he predicted 9/11 in, I think it was July of 2001. He predicted an attack on the Twin Towers, and his audience knows that. His audience knows that he somehow had some inside knowledge that this was going to happen before it did. And so when he's saying there's going to be another 9/11, this is something that it's more than just some other third party saying this to his audience. This is like an oracle. And so this is extraordinarily, and especially with that imagery being repeated over and over again of we're watching people die over and over again as the plane is going into buildings. This is horrific. This is absolutely horrific. And doing it with a communist. It's funny to me, especially because just 2 weeks ago, it was about a week or two ago, on X, Alex Jones told me directly in a response to one of my posts that he insisted that he's not a Marxist. So it's even more hilarious to me. But I mean, it's not funny. This is horrific and tragic.
Well, it makes me wonder.
He may not be a Marxist, but he's served the Marxist cause now for 15 years.
So he may not be a Marxist, you say, but he's serving the Marxist cause right now.
So I don't think Tucker Carlson's a Marxist.
Do these guys know this? Do they know they're serving the Marxist cause? Do they know that?
Well, no, but see, they don't understand that Russia is Marxist. That it's still Marxist. They think Russia is Christian now. So they're really serving the real Christians against the satanic Jewish West. That's how they see it.
And I want to stop you right there. But they're also saying that people like me that are Christian Zionists are fake Christians. So now they're going after the fake. We got people going after the fake Jews. We need a DNA test, right? Figure out who the real Jews are. You got him going after the, quote, fake Jews, and let's go after the fake Christians, because what Brannon, Howse, and those other Christian Zionists believe is that's not in the Bible. So now we're all being set up. There's your Hegelian dialectic, set up by the left and the right. And who's in the center for this incher strategy? The Christian Zionists and the Jews. And that's exactly what we predicted now for a long time.
Mainstream conservatives, mainstream Republicans.
Here's another screenshot. Russian insider Victor Bout. I mean, this is Alex Jones's own description of him. Russian insider Victor Bout responds to Israel takeover at the Pentagon. Really? Now, what proof do you have of a Israeli takeover at the Pentagon?
Well, if the Israelis had taken over the Pentagon, why were the Israelis stopped from going after Hamas
in Lebanon?
Why was the Israelis stopped from the bombing campaign against the nuclear facilities? And why were the Israelis stopped from bombing Iran in recent times, which they want to do?
And in Lebanon, you got Hezbollah in Lebanon. Why, if they're in charge, why was President Trump reporting on the phone? And this is, I don't know if I believe these reports or not, but there are a lot of them out there, that Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump got into an argument on the phone, and Trump dropped some curse words at him and told him you'd be in jail, and it wasn't for me, and this is why people don't like you in Israel. And I don't know if any of that's true, but that's what's floating around, right? So now, if it's not true, I hope it's not true.
If Israel was really control of the Pentagon, would Trump be saying stuff like that?
No. And would he be telling Israel, stop bombing Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Yeah.
No, he'd be saying, do what you want because you're in charge of the Pentagon. Go ahead. But if President Trump really did not say those things, okay, and even if he did, the fact that that's now out in the press, that is going to give a percentage of MAGA people in their minds now justification to be anti-Semitic. If he really said this is why people hate you and hate Israel, I pray he didn't say that. Scott?
Yeah, that reporter, the thing about that story is that it's an Axios reporter who has a history of doing very similar reports, making incendiary claims about some sort of antagonistic remarks or exchanges between Trump and Netanyahu right before they have a scheduled meeting. And he's been doing this for some time, and it's always based on anonymous sources. And so we really just have to trust this reporter who already has a demonstrated track record of making what appear to be fabricated claims. So I don't think that story is true, partly for that reason, because if you look at what is the likely intended outcome of that, it's to try to make more anti-Semites on the right. And I'm going to at least withhold my judgment on whether or not that's true until we see what happens in this next meeting.
Yeah, exactly right.
Axios itself is suspect. Axios itself is a fount of left-wing disinformation. But I know exactly what you're talking about there, Scott. And I'll withhold judgment too, I think.
Logan, can you go to the bookmarks? I want to play this one. Look at this one, the headline. Alex Jones's own Twitter feed. Russia stands as the main obstacle for the past couple of centuries to the globalists. Victor Bout breaks down how God has his hand on Russia and the U.S. to stand against the satanic New World Order's neo-fatal system. Who else is in their way? Of course, the American nation. This is very interesting because in another comment, if you follow the whole thread through, he's making the claim that it was the Jews that were involved in the original Bolshevik revolution. So again, it looks like it's Russia standing up to the Jews. Russia is going to, and America together can fight off the Jews. Is that what I'm picking up here, guys?
Well, that's his message to the U.S. right. That's how you get the U.S. right liking Russia. But this is an echo of old Russian propaganda from the past. This is a communist agent who's saying this stuff. So what's his message? His message is to divide us and make us think Russia is our friend when Russia is one of our main enemies. and Alex Jones is promoting this stuff. Look, it's pretty transparent when you look at it from that point of view. But and this was what Hitler said about the Jews. The Jews did the Bolshevik Revolution. What Hitler did, he went to the German working class and says, "We're going to save you. Us Nazis will save you from the Jewish communists." Then he went to the German industrialists. He went to the German industrialists and said, "We will save you from the Jewish communists." Then he went to the German working class and said, "We will save you from the Jewish capitalists." So this is, about as the exact opposite is true, right? If you look at Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine is way more Christian than Russia. Christianity is free in Russia, but in Ukraine, but in Russia, it's very tightly controlled by the Orthodox Church, which is run by the KGB. There's very, very little real religious freedom in Russia. Russia cannot claim to be a godly or Christian nation in any sense of the word. Church going is way less in America. Abortion is way higher. Divorce, illegitimacy, alcoholism and drug abuse are worse in Russia than they are here. And but we're led to believe by people like Viktor Bout, the communist, the self-proclaimed communist, that Russia is this Christian nation, this bastion of Christianity that's going to save us, the West, from the Muslim hordes and George Soros and the gay movement, all of which was originally sponsored by Russia, by the way.
Here's a headline from Reuters back in 2022. Who is Viktor Bout? The Russian arms dealer swapped for Griner. That was the basketball player, I guess. All right, this was on Alex Jones today. Watch this next clip, guys.
It's very simple. Russia stands as a main obstacle for the past, at least couple hundred centuries for globalists really to turn the global control over and over. And the Russia always at the last moment, succeeded by the heroic efforts of our grandfathers and grandfathers to repel the invasion, and like this basically thwarts their plans for global domination.
We'll say it. I think God has had his hand on Russia, who's an extremely Christian country. Would you not say it's God using Russia?
Correct. And then the situation, as we said, they decided, okay, who else standing on their way? Of course, this is American nation who has at least certain, constitutional, points who's still working. So they need really to get also crack down on the liberties and freedom in America, freedom of speech, freedom, Second Amendment. And this is all interrelated processes, because if we understand this is all globalists who really want to set up a total global control, imposed us into this basically neo-feudal system. Everybody has no rights of expression, live and eat up the shit they're gonna feed us, and has this matrix of what you say, live in some virtual worlds and don't ask the question, and they exploit you. They harvest the organs, they do whatever they want, And this is a very, very bad future for humanity. We need really to do everything we can to prevent them even think about achieving these targets.
There is a war
All right,
raging.
so that's interesting. Now, is that dated today, Logan? Put today. Look what I just found. This is not the first time he's had him on. Here's May 26th. Must watch. Top Russian insider Viktor Bout lays out how Putin is preparing to strike inside Europe and why these NATO sites are legitimate military targets. Who are these guys rooting for Pete's sake?
Well, Tucker Carlson has said repeatedly, "I'm rooting for Russia." Said it repeatedly. And I'll tell you who else echoes what Boot just said. And this will shock a lot of people, and it shocked me, as General Flynn, who said, the Russian invasion of the Russian attack on Ukraine has upset the plans of the globalists, upset the plans of the world globalists. Nobody is more globalist than Russia and China, who are allies. But they're running this scam saying if we invade Europe, or we attack the United States, is to stop the globalists, and which conflates to Jews, most of the time anyway. So what you saw from Victor Bout, abetted by Alex Jones, was a classic example of Russian propaganda designed to appeal to American conservatives.
Did General Flynn say that in a tweet? Where did he say that?
I'm not sure. He said it more than one occasion, but I definitely saw him say that. Look, it's very sad to say, because a lot of us have held General Flynn in very high regard, but he has become increasingly a vehicle for Russian propaganda. And that started several years ago, and Scott knows a lot about that. But look, he had Glenn Dyson at one of his conferences very recently. Glenn Dyson is one of the major Russian propagandists on the planet, a friend of Alexander Dugin's.
Who is this? Glenn Dyson? Who is he?
Glenn Dyson, right there.
Who is he?
Norwegian guy, major Russian propagandist, major.
He says I'm going to read his own bio here. He says he's a professor, editor, Russian foreign policy, Greater Eurasia and Geoeconomics, Greater Eurasia podcast. And he was speaking where?
Flynn had a conference recently, and Dyson was one of the main speakers at it.
What do you know about that, Scott?
Well, I think that's not for certain, that's not the only time that he's been, in either at a speaking event or promoted and amplified someone with close Russian propaganda ties. I mean, one prime example is Jackson Hinkle. Jackson Hinkle is a co-founder of the American Communist Party. He moved to Moscow right after Trump was elected because he said that under Trump that it would no longer be safe for him to live in the United States. So he moved to Moscow, and Flynn has promoted Jackson Hinkle multiple times on X, including just days after Charlie Kirk's death. Trevor, you talked about the gray zone originating this idea that it was the Jews that killed, or Israel that killed Charlie Kirk. Jackson Hinkle wrote this long post promoting that narrative, and Flynn responded to this saying, this is something that every American needs to see. And
can anyone show these tweets so we have all this documented?
Yeah, I have that all documented on my Substack. Logan,
can you show any of that? And of course, didn't we have General Flynn praising Carrie Prejean at the Catholics for Catholics event? And of course, we all saw what Carrie did, right?
Yeah, and even more
Candace
than that.
Owens, right? Was she there? And was she at the Catholics for Catholic event? Oh,
yes, she was.
Yes, she was.
And Joe Kent, so when Joe Kent wrote his resignation letter that was just trashing Trump on the way out, it was just hours after he wrote that resignation letter, which was explicitly anti-Trump, anti-American, really. And within hours of that, Flynn arranged for Joe Kent to join on that stage as well, that same Catholics for Catholics event. So yes, that was one of so many other examples. Flynn also, around that same time, he shared a post by a Tucker Carlson interviewing Zhang Shexin, who he's a Duginist. He has close ties to the CCP, and in that interview, they were calling for the end of the U.S. dollar hegemony and a new multipolar world order. And Flynn shares this, saying that it's the most powerful and important geopolitical podcast or whatever that he'd seen in over a decade. And so he's not just sharing this. This is a full-throated endorsement of it. And I've also got video on my Substack in my most recent post talking. There's an example of Flynn talking about promoting that Jackson Hinkle thing, promoting Israel, the idea that Israel was behind Charlie Kirk's assassination. And he says this timeline and set of statements have to be part of any serious investigation. And he tags Pam Bondi, and that's when she was still the Attorney General.
But when I was working with him, I asked him point blank, how many times has Israel saved American lives with technology? and I'm sure it's in our archive, he said many, many times. I mean, every time he was with me and I was interviewing him and he was at this desk, because he knows where I stand as a Christian Zionist, he was always very pro-Israel. Is this a new turn, guys?
In recent times, he has been, any chance he can to attack Israel, he's been taking it.
Would you agree with that?
Also,
Would you agree with Trevor's opinion on that, Scott?
Yeah, after October 7th and the Palestinians' attack on Israel, he was one of the biggest voices that was promoting the idea that Netanyahu let them come in and that this was an inside job, and that idea right there has been one of the strongest sources of amplification for this movement of anti-Semitism, this infection, really.
Right, but I want to make clear, I can be against things the Israeli government does without being against the Jewish people, and I can say, hey, Israel has a deep state the way America has a deep state. Sure. I don't have a problem saying, because our reporter on the ground in Israel, I think, was a lot of us asked, how did this happen? You know, Alan Dershowitz is a Jewish gentleman, as we already know. He's told me in an interview we have in the archive that some of those girls were trying to reach the people up top to tell them something's going on, something's about to go down, and they were being ignored. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with someone saying, sure, I think there were signs and problems that should have caused lots of people to notice that something was about to happen. I don't think that's anti-Semitic, but I do think at some point you have to, you have to be very careful.
Well, you have to look at the pattern here.
Yeah,
exactly. Like Trevor said, you have to look at the pattern. It's not just isolated data points. Any one of them on its own could be something that you could dispute. But when you look at the pattern and the promotion of multipolarity, the event, it was called a Night of Intrigue that Flynn's Eli Gold Institute hosted just last month, and it was all about, in the promotional materials, it was talking about bringing together and studying and being prepared for a multipolar world. And it was a meeting with what they advertised, over 50 foreign ambassadors and agents of foreign countries. And so, they're coordinating and organizing these events. And you mentioned globalism and that Russia, Trevor, you quoted Flynn and saying that Russia was an opponent of globalism. But even at this speaking event that Candace Owens is doing, I think it's today, it's the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which is Russia's version of the World Economic Forum. It's a total globalist forum, and they absolutely are. And this is what Candace Owens is there, and Andrew Tate just got there for that as well. I just saw, so he's going to be speaking there as well.
Look at that, Candace Owens, the Christian expression and heritage here. She's in Moscow. Is unmatched. Unsurprisingly, they are lying to us about Russia. Trevor?
If you do a close-up of some of those pictures, there's hammer and sickles on the roof there.
Yep.
Which ones?
The bottom left image. Yeah, the bottom left image, if you go in the stained glass in the roof, not that, that one right there. So just up and to the right of the Christ, the crucifixion, in the ceiling, in the light blue ceiling. If you zoom in right up there, kind of on the side in the archway, there's a round. You can kind of see it there. If you go, yeah.
Where am I looking, guys?
It's in that light blue arched stained glass ceiling.
Uh-huh.
The band that's closest to us.
Mm-hmm.
There's a round insignia on the far right.
Are you seeing it,
zoom
Logan?
into that?
Yeah, it's in the far right star closest to it. You can't really see it because it's small. It's in yellow in the circle.
It's so it's that yellow one with the red, and then
you're off. Their cursor all the way to the right.
All the way to the right there.
Inside of that circle.
Oh wow, that's a hammer and sickle. The far right side, hammer and sickle right up in there.
Yep.
All right. Can you screenshot that and go in any closer, Logan?
Yep. Give me a second.
So she's saying this is wonderful Christian imagery and whatnot, and it's got the hammer and sickle.
Which really just, that looks at the history, clearly, the church was there during communism.
How did you know that, Scott and Trevor?
An account that I follow had pointed that out, and so I shared it. I reposted it on my on X. There you go.
Yeah, that's it.
Good job, Logan. Good job, guys.
This is the whole point. People talk about Russia being a Christian country. The church-going rates are way smaller than they are in America, but you can only be a Christian in Russia if you're a member of the Orthodox Church. If you're an evangelical, if you're anything else, you cannot bring you can have a little church, but you cannot bring your children into it till they're 18, and you cannot proselytize outside the walls of your church. The only church you can attend freely is the Russian Orthodox Church, and the head of that, Archpatriarch Kirill, is an acknowledged KGB agent, as are many of his church leaders. The church in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church, is an organ of the state. It is a state church, and is used to promote the communist line or the Russian line amongst the people. It's a tool. So to say that Russia is a Christian country is completely fallacious. There are Christians there, but nowhere near as many as there are in Ukraine or Romania or the Baltic states or any of the countries that Russia keeps attacking.
I think it's also important to look at the persecution by Russia of the churches in Ukraine, in the portions of Ukraine that have been taken over by Russia. They've destroyed hundreds of churches.
Look at this from Alex Jones. Is that today? Yep. Sean Ryan and Megyn Kelly say core MAGA is now pedophile supporting Israeli lobby. Alex Jones responds, this indicates how unpopular Israel is now. Why are they, first of all, why are they saying pedophile supporting? Because you got Epstein with a Jewish last name? I mean, why this? And why are we not spending our time talking about, again, Islam? I got a piece over at worldviewreport.com that talks about the boys. Here we go, by my friend Robert Spencer. Afghan Taliban commanders engage in rampant sexual abuse of boys. And by the way, this is not something that's not unknown. The children forced into Baca Baza.
Yeah, Bacha-bazi.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well known. That's not new. You go study that. And the videos are extremely disturbing, I must tell you. You've seen them, right? These little prepubescent boys, 12, 13 year old boys kind of parading around looking kind of like girls, but parading around in front of grown men. Have you seen those? Have any of you seen that?
I've read about it. I don't have any interest in watching that kind of thing.
No, I don't either, but I've seen it on social media when guys are, when people are out there exposing this, saying, look at what these guys are doing with these young kids. There's nothing, they're not unclothed or anything. So I'm not, in fact, I'll just show you one. Here it is right here. Here we go. What's this? What's all that? You know?
Yep.
And this is coming from Dr. Molov, who is, we've quoted him before. What's his deal? What's his slogan here? I guess just into history. And Afghan and parts of Pakistan, the segregation of women is so extreme, they had to invent the Bacha-bazi. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Bacha-bazi.
So, I mean, anyone can put this into social media and find this kind of garbage going on. Some of these are girls, not all of them are boys. But, I mean, Robert Spencer's writing about it. Here's the one I was referring to. This is the one I've seen on social media. These little boys dancing around like this, carrying on, or these, which I think at one point they're on the floor kind of twerking. Yeah, like that. I don't know what that's all about, but supposedly some of this stuff goes on in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Robert Spencer writing about it. today talks about that. The children forced into this. In fact, Daily Mail. I mean, that's not like a right-wing organization. There you go. So why is social media not full of this? I guess is what I'm saying. Why is it always the pedophile pro-Israel MAGA group? What?
Because the left will not attack Islam. The left covers for Islam, and now Islam is also allied to Iran and Russia. You know, we've got to remember October 7th. That's Vladimir Putin's birthday, people. You know, Hamas was in Russia a few days before the attack on Israel. And there's credible reports that Russia was training some of the paragliders that were used to fly over the fences to attack the people on the ground. And so Russia, this connection between Russia and Islam, this connection between communism and Islam, is downplayed all the time by the left, because the left basically loves anybody that hates America, and they will not expose anybody who's against us. So these people get a free pass.
So as we get ready to wrap here, Trevor, and then you, Scott, and I'll promote your Twitter feeds. Where do you see this going, Trevor? What is going to happen here as we go into the midterms, the next election, and now they're pushing Tulsi Gabbard? You know, I just saw a video of her. I think it was her and her husband. You know, and I wish her husband well with his health crisis, obviously. But, you know, I see them on a video. There's a video of them. Logan, maybe you can find it. And they're singing, and he's playing the ukulele, and he's quite good at it, by the way. And they're singing, you know, I think they're singing John Lennon's song, Imagine. I'm like,
Imagine, yeah, the communist anthem.
That's not a conservative song.
No, look, Tulsi Gabbard was brought up in a Hindu cult that was founded by the son of a Communist Party member that had ties to communist China and was actually prosecuted for selling drugs for the Taliban. That's the organization she grew up in, and then spent most of the rest of her life hanging around with Democratic Socialists of America and pro-Russian activists like Jeffrey Sachs and Jackson Hinkle, head of the American Communist Party, who she was surfing buddies with. But she's just the kind of person who should be filtering intelligence for the president, right? She was put in place by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson loves Russia. Tulsi Gabbard has never met an enemy of America she didn't like. She was engineered in that position, and I am so thankful she is leaving it.
And I guess this is not a new video. It's just recirculating. I guess the one person that posted it's back to September 6, 2025. It was not new. So yep. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to end up being the result of all this, Trevor?
Well, I think Tulsi will try and run for president in 2028 to split the Republican vote. I think that's very likely to happen. You know, it depends on the health of her husband and that, I suppose, you know, to a large degree. But look, the goal is to split and destroy the Republican Party so the Democrats take over, who will then cancel pack the Supreme Court, end the Electoral College, reopen the borders, and make Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. states with 4 more Marxist senators and destroy America. That's the plan here. So I'm just putting out the message, and I'm glad Scott's doing this, to try and get Republicans to understand who is behind splitting their movement, how the Russians are deliberately spreading anti-Semitism to split our movement, and come back together. You know,
and infiltrating our churches, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, as Scott has been saying,
yep.
We're going to be saved in this country by the grassroots Christians and the grassroots conservatives fighting for America with American values. That's what's going to save us. And the sooner we get rid of these distractions, the better.
Scott, as we get ready to close, what do you see coming when you listen to all this?
Well, I think I definitely agree with Trevor. I think, you know, they tell us what their goal is, which is the destruction of America and the rising of this new multipolar world order that's led by communist countries. And so, you know, that's their goal. And there's one issue that I've looked at quite a bit is election fraud. I do think that it's likely that there was fraud in 2020, but there really is no evidence that there was machine fraud in 2020, and that whole machine fraud narrative was, in my view, a psychological operation that was deliberately intended to disenfranchise Republican voters. Because if you believe that machines flip votes, then truly there is no point in voting, because there's no limit to how many votes they can flip.
But didn't we see that from people like Matt DePerno in Michigan, that some of that was going on?
No, that's not actually what happened in Antrim County. What actually happened in Antrim County was, and this is I have to get a little bit into the weeds. I'll try to be very succinct. In Antrim County, as in many other counties, there was a special election before the November election, and there was a change in the ballot as a result of that, kind of a somewhat last minute change in the ballot. And in the software needs to be updated to reflect any changes of the ballot, so it knows how to read that ballot, which makes sense, right? And they were directed to put USB cards and drives into each of the tabulators and the EMS, the election management software, or servers, to update that software so it knew how to read the ballots. It didn't happen because of negligence or whatever. Those updates didn't happen in Antrim County, which caused the servers and the tabulators in Antrim County to misread those ballots. Once they found out what the problem was, they updated, they gave them the cards, they updated the software in the machines, they ran the ballots through again, and it was fine. This was not deliberate. And this is from Matt DePerno's website. This is the information that he found, and you can see it yourself in the reports on his website.
And you and Matt are good friends, right?
Yes. Yeah, can I add something to that, Brannon?
Yeah.
Look, I've been writing for several years now about the massive Chinese-sponsored voter registration organizations in Michigan, in Georgia, in California, Pennsylvania, Arizona, all the key swing states, who boast on their websites how they how they won the election for Biden-Harris in 2020 and 2022. None of them have been investigated. We're all chasing machine fraud. I don't know. Scott knows more about it than me. I don't know there wasn't machine fraud, but I know these Chinese-sponsored operations were working on the ground, and you can find them on Facebook, and they're still doing it now. To me, It's a distraction. You should be going after them. They're doing it. They're stealing elections under our noses and boasting about it on Facebook, directly linked to the Chinese. Surely that would be an easier operation to shut down than going after the Venezuelan voting machines.
Yep. And talking about Mike Flynn, I mean, he's been very, very aggressively involved in especially the election integrity influencer space. And that space is very heavily infiltrated with people who are continuously pushing narratives and ideas that are either unproven, unprovable, or outright false, and pushing those. And it's partly a distraction technique. It's partly a technique to cause the independents and Democrats to believe that it's all a big lie, because there's so many lies that are being promoted, and to keep us from looking exactly at what you're talking about, Trevor. Because I think that if there was fraud in 2020, I absolutely agree it was in the voter rolls. And I've done my own small investigation in my own township that shows that probably was the case. If there was fraud, it was in the voter rolls and with the mail-in ballots. But we're not looking there. Instead, we're looking at the machines. We're talking about Venezuela and Serbian servers, which there's no evidence to support any of that. It's all made up. And I think that's all by design, because it causes us to lose, to accept a nihilistic view and a hopeless view towards our election system, so that we don't vote. And that the real election interference happens on the level of our hearts and minds. And this is where, going back to Russia making this investment in perverting and misleading us in our hearts and minds, leading us towards hopelessness and chaos. If we don't trust our election system and we don't vote, Democrats are good. They trust the election system. They're going to get out and vote. Now, one thing just with regards, and I know you want to wrap up really quick, I think is so important that we vote. Especially believers, but everybody. I mean, it's important that we actually cast our ballots. And the surest way to ensure that we do that, if your state allows it, is through mail-in voting. And, early voting and mail-in voting, if Republicans are losing, like in Virginia, the reason why Democrats took over Virginia and that state is because the Democrats had a 3-to-1 advantage in mail-in voting. If we have a 3-to-1 disadvantage in mail-in voting before we get to election day ballots, we can't overcome that on election day. We just can't. And so we need to vote. I think if your state allows it, register to vote early. Here in Michigan, we have a permanent absentee voting list that you can register on with the Secretary of State to be on the permanent AV list. You get mailed a ballot automatically for every election that you can vote in, and it ensures that you get the ballot and then you can drop it off by hand. So you don't have to trust the mail. You can drop it off by hand at the clerk's office, and that way your vote's going to count. And then you can volunteer to work polls and see how the polls actually work, or you can be an election challenger. That's what I do, a poll challenger. And it's a great way to learn about how our elections actually work, so you can find where there might be, lapses of integrity or transparency, and find ways to improve the system, and then advocate and lobby for that.
Wow, what a broadcast tonight, guys! Absolutely amazing. Let me show you Scott's X account if you want to follow Scott. He's at Bigger Truth, If you want to follow him on X. Trevor Loudon is at Trevor Loudon 1, at Trevor Loudon 1. So, gentlemen, the big word tonight is discernment. Discernment. Not being deceived by misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, idea, opposite idea, right, left. The desire to create chaos and conflict and confusion, so much so that people finally throw up their arms and say, you know what, I don't know who to trust. I don't trust any of these people anymore, so I'm just checking out. And I'm afraid that we're getting to a point where it's becoming so confusing, even on the right, that many people are doing that. Not just because, again, maybe they think their vote doesn't count anymore, but now it's like, I don't know who to trust anymore, so I'm just going to check out of the whole thing. I'm concerned that's what a lot of people are doing, and it creates, as you say, this nihilism, that life has no ultimate meaning or purpose, and that this whole thing is just a gigantic mistake. I'm just going to hunker down and not pay attention to anything anymore. I'm just going to live my life and forget about it. And I know people doing that. I know people after the 2020 election said, I'm done voting. It doesn't matter. And they walked away. They don't follow us anymore. They don't vote. They don't keep what's going on after 2020. Now, can you imagine if they were still around after this confusion? How much the right and MAGA seems to be infiltrated? If the 2020 election didn't discourage them from checking out, this should discourage a lot of people from staying involved.
Well, that's the plan. The Yuri Bezmenov, the Russian defector, pointed out there are stages of destroying a country, and demoralization. Mm-hmm. The KGB studied this. Demoralize the people, give them a sense of hopelessness, so they check out, they're no longer engaged. So this is a major demoralization exercise. It's a stage in the revolution.
What a broadcast tonight, guys. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Brannon.
All right, there you go, guys. Now, don't you think that's an important interview? And we didn't interrupt it with one commercial break for almost 2 hours straight. Show me another network that would do that, folks. All right, so here's the deal. We give you this kind of programming night after night after night. But we have to have your support. Please consider going right now to worldviewfoundation.com. Let's go there. worldviewfoundation.com and make a contribution of any size. Would you do it right now? worldviewfoundation.com. You'll also find our mailing address there if you prefer to support us through the mail. Do you appreciate what we're doing? Do you want us to keep doing this? Keep going? Or would you rather that we air the first hour and then put the rest behind the paywall? I bet you that would get a lot of people joining pretty quick, Logan. The first hour is going to be open to everybody. Anything after the first hour goes behind the paywall. I don't want to do that. So if you guys support us, we can keep everything out and front and center each and every night like we're doing. 2 hours almost right there with no commercial break. Worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. But let me talk about the vault, because after 7 days, our content does roll into the vault. And Logan, by the way, just added 2 hours of David Hawking, the wonderful Bible teacher, prophecy teacher, Dr. David Hawking, who sat at this desk and taught in 2018. We finally got it post-edited. It was on a hard drive, not post-edited since 2018. Now that's in the vault. Brand new keynote presentation from several years ago, now in the vault by Dr. John Ankerberg. A lot of great stuff in the vault, folks. And my new documentary, Brainwashed America Part 3 and 4, I'm sorry, that will be for vault members only. It's just too expensive. So again, the vault has its memberships. And we just released now not only the Revelation course you can take in the vault, if you remember, but now Grave Influence. And hopefully before the week is over, the entire course of Put Your Beliefs to the Test. 3 courses before the week is over. 2 there now, 1 yet to come. And they're automatically a part of your membership. WorldviewTube.com/vault. All right, roll the music. Let's call it a night. One more shot of Dolly before we call it a night for the new instituted Dolly Cam. Now watch what I say. See what she does. All right, guys, that's our broadcast for tonight. As always, thank you for tuning in and supporting the broadcast. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. May God save America. Take care. You see? She knows the slogan, guys. She knows the slogan. Oh, you're a good girl, Dolly. All right, you know the slogan. May God save America. And she's up and ready to go. You're a good girl. Let's go. Come on.
Faith, spiritual values, moral issues, government, economy, education, work, responsibility. What we think about these depends on our worldview. Now, VCY America presents Worldview Radio with Brannon Howse.
Welcome. Glad you guys are with us today. I want to talk about something today, and I want to be very careful here because I'm not saying this to be provocative. I'm not saying this to offend anyone. I'm not saying this to create division, although divisions are good. The Bible says there must be divisions among you to know who is approved of God. The Bible also warns us in the book of Acts that men have risen from within. Men have risen from within to draw away the disciples from themselves, to draw away the disciples unto themselves. And I believe as I watch what's happening with a segment of the MAGA world, not all of it, I want to be very clear here, but a segment of the MAGA world is something that I have been warning about prior to the official formation of Make America Great Coalition. You know, I wrote the book. I talk about it probably too much, but I want, again, to show the history of this and to let you know where you can get the resources. You know, I wrote a book in 2011 called The Religious Trojan Horse. Religious Trojan Horse, 2011. You don't need to buy it, by the way. If you're a member of the Vault, it's 500 and some odd pages, like 600 footnotes. It's in the Vault as a PDF under library and ebooks.